And get going. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for our City Council Budget Development meeting, the meeting after the public hearing. The City Council, we need to discuss a few things, and so thank you for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started. Connie, could you please call the roll?
Addison? Here. Gray?
Here.
Cheatham?
Here.
Lurick? Here. Ortega? Here. Stevens? Here. Black?
Here. Thank you. I'll move to agenda item number 2 is a fiscal year 2022 budget discussion. Finance staff will review public comments and council direction discussion from the August 5, 2021 budget hearing. Jim, thank you for being with us.
It's my extreme pleasure to be here today.
For sure.
To be able to discuss this salient subject entitled the fiscal year 2022 budget. And as the mayor indicated, and thank you, Mayor, I am glad to be here. So to start out with public comments. If my tally is correct, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, I, as well as you, as well as the people out there in TV land, heard 13 comments directly made by citizens who came forward and commented on the budget. From what I could tell, there were 3 people that said very distinctly that they were against the budget as it was proposed. Aside from that, I don't think I heard anybody that said they were in favor of the budget per se, but what they did say, the remaining 8 were that they did not believe additional cuts should be made. There was a couple of clarification questions related to cuts. One of which was is there any place in the budget that includes a $1 million reduction in budgeted expenditures in the general fund? And the answer to that question is no. There is no item in the budget that includes a $1 million reduction. And then the other question, and I'm not sure if I phrased that exactly the way it was asked to me, but I think my answer was that no, there was not any item in the budget. And essentially there was a question also related to cuts in the budget, and the answer to that question is, for all intents and purposes, there really haven't been much in the way of cuts in this budget that has been proposed. There were some adjustments that were made related to some of the areas that, from my perspective, and a discussion that I did have with the mayor, that should have resulted in a reduction in the budget. Those were incorporated in the proposed budget that was published. The net result of all of that is, I've got it in back of you here. I thought I'd do it this way so that everybody can see. Hopefully it's observable or discernible from way far back in the back there. I don't think the deficit looks any better from back there than it does right up here. So we've got a net deficit of $906,766. I am aware of, based upon the questions that Councilmember Stevens asked.
Tear down significantly?
Well, we've got a $49,000 reduction that can be made either in the general fund or in Fund 78, depending upon which you would prefer, for a car for the building department. $49,000 was budgeted twice. It's in the general fund as well as in Fund 78. So if you did choose to reduce the general fund deficit by taking that out of the budget, that would result in a deficit of $857,766. And I thought I would put this up here just to keep tabs as we go through the discussion from this point forward. Of course, if you decide that you would rather see the Fund 78 budget amount changed instead, that's obviously your choice, whichever way you'd like to do that. I do have, we worked on the answers to Councilmember Stevens' questions, and thank you for paring those down to the number that we ended up with. And I did count your original, it was around 50, I think. So I think you incorporated all of the elements from what I could tell that you wanted to.
Oh, I thought I just took out philosophical and procedural questions that really are a moot point this year. It's too late.
Right.
That horse is out of the barn, so.
So I do have those answers. I'd like to pass those out in a moment. But before I do, I also wanted to just talk a little bit about property taxes and to let you know that there's a little bit of a change in the property tax scenario. It's not terribly significant, but it's something that I wanted to apprise all of you about. The information that typically we would have gotten well before the publication of the budget, I did not receive until about a week after the budget was actually published. And the net result of that is the L2 form that I received shows, I'm just going to verbally mention it to you and then I'll hand out what I have. It talks about, and this relates to my not remembering how property taxes work exactly in Idaho, but you can use the property tax levy, the highest non-exempt property tax levy amount over the last 3 years. 2 years ago, we actually levied more taxes than we did when we went through this process last year, which is incorporated in this year's budget. We, as a result of the changes in the governor's, the way he gave some money back to property taxpayers, the amount that we actually levied for this current year is less than the amount that we did for the prior year. What we incorporated in the published budget was a 3% increase for growth. And I'll hand this out now, but essentially the amount that we can levy based on the non-exempt amount from 2 years ago is actually higher than the amount that we show. The calculation's over there on the top right-hand side. And I'll give some to the peanut gallery if there's any left over. So the amount that we can actually levy, could have levied, if you could pass that down, I would appreciate it, is higher than the amount that we actually published. That being the case, it's too bad. What we publish is what we have to stick with. But included in that number, so what I showed in the published budget was $30,246,569 plus. It was moved by the City Council that a 3% growth amount of $939,327 would be included in the published budget. That's a total of $31,185,896. That does not include the exempt portion, which is the debt service, but essentially, if you look at the first column of numbers, it shows that we could have levied $31,310,899. So technically, on that basis, we could have levied that higher amount. We're levying, based upon what's in the published budget, $125,003 less than that. It's still your choice. You can decide how you want to deal with property taxes one way or the other. You can't take the 3% at this point, though. That you're prohibited from doing so. And then in addition to that, I did show a new construction amount, which I'm trying to find it on here. If you go about, well, I'm not seeing it. It's a little bit further down on the page, number 10. Essentially, we showed about $315,000 as the amount that we could take for new construction. They're saying it's a little bit less, but that sort of comes out in the wash to some extent. So
it's at $312,900.
Yeah, that's correct. And then I will hand out the answers, and if you'd like, I can certainly go through those.
Before we get into that, Mayor, could I got a PowerPoint, and I don't want this to go stale.
Is it relative to this right now, or
It sets a context, and it carries over from our policy discussion that we had in our public hearing.
I'd like to finish this before we get into that, Roger.
Well, I think this sets context.
Well, it'll have context afterward, too.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go ahead and finish here, and then Roger will turn the time to Roger.
So Jim, is this stuff that you got after publication from the state?
No,
Or the county?
It comes from the county auditor's office.
Okay.
And it's not their fault per se.
No, I'm not.
There was a big change in the calculation, and they just didn't have the information prior to that.
Oh, thank you.
Making sure I don't mess it up this time.
Yeah, don't
last-
collate. Okay, stapled it, so it's there.
Right, to protect against my
Thank you.
poor skill sets.
So as I said earlier, Councilmember Stevens had about 50 questions, and she pared those down to the number that you see here. Many of the questions I disseminated to departments to give them an opportunity to give answers as it would be appropriate to do so. The first question is, should we continue to have Fund 78 since there's actually no such thing as departments reserving funds within that fund? And my answer is, and I go through an answer there, but essentially, I think in theory it is good to have a Fund 78. It's good to have a fund to be able to garner some resources. From my view, I don't think it's worked out very well because I think there is some confusion about the money that's left in Fund 78 and what that should be used for. I believe, based on just my guesstimate, I do not believe we have as much money in reserve in Fund 78 as what we would need in order to do the capital improvements that are needed in order to essentially bring us up to a level of where we would be able to provide services in a manner that we should be able to continue to do so on an ongoing basis. So essentially, I don't think we have a sustainable balance in Fund 78. This is something I reluctantly say because I've done this in other jurisdictions where I recommend that there be some type of either a budget or finance committee. But the next question is there a better way to incentivize departments to save money? There's two ends of the spectrum, either tightening budgets down to the point where it's very difficult for there to be any savings, or having budgets that are much more, or not much more, but somewhat more than what they typically would need to be, and that would result in savings. So that's one way to incentivize savings, is to over budget. I don't necessarily think that we're altogether over budgeting. I think there may be some room for improvement in the way that we're handling our budgets, and I think having a budget committee, just another layer that would help in the process, might be advisable. And also to help as it relates to the 5-year budgets. I think 5-year budgets would help us be able to answer that question as it relates to, are we over budgeting, or are we right on the mark as it relates to what we should be budgeting? Taking into account positions needed, being able to provide the services, et cetera. That's where I would go with that, is I think it deserves a little bit more attention and maybe a subcommittee of the City Council. And what I would suggest is having 2 council members, 2 members at large that could be either appointed by the council at large or by each one of those council members that are on that subcommittee. And then whoever that poor soul is that becomes the CFO would also be involved in that meeting. I do believe that in the case of the last item, how should Fund 78 and its intentions be handled within a best practice scenario, there needs to be a capital improvement plan. We need to have what's called a CIP, capital improvement plan, I know we have those in the case of water and sewer, and I think sanitation as well. We need one for the general government as well. And I believe that would help us with Fund 78 to develop what is a reasonable amount of money in that fund to use for capital purposes. The next question related to mayor and city council member increases that were done on January 1st, 2020. The question was, what would happen if those were rolled back? 19,870 difference on the salary amount and $29,000 difference on the medical amount. Number 3, as I understand it, the policy already has been changed to incorporate 150,000 miles as the turnover point on vehicles versus 100,000, which had been, apparently that had been used in the past. I don't know how long that's been in force, Tom, whether that's something that is an ongoing.
Yeah, when we, Concord from Deputy Public Works Director. That's when we started fleet. That was the model we're pushing towards.
So a picture's worth 1,000 words. And number 4, it looks like a nice vehicle. I have no idea how old that vehicle is, but I think that the intention would be that would be the type of vehicle that could be used to deal with that $49,000 item that's in the budget.
And do we have, Tom, is there something, is that a city car, or is there something comparable to what we're seeing available?
So we've been working really closely with the chief, and we've, in the police department, we've basically got them to a motor pool. They're right-sized. I mean, we're dialed in, and that was a vehicle. There's a couple of those through the right-sizing process that are now at fleet, and so if there's a use for them, we can use those. If not, then they'll go to auction.
So would that then mean that the 49,000 for a vehicle would then come out of the
Other
budget?
fund, yes.
Okay.
Would come out of both funds.
Right, right.
Is that vehicle in good condition? Does it?
It's used, but it's,
Well,
yeah, and it's, you know, it's
so
like
mine.
120,000 miles. I mean, but I drove it the other day and it runs really good and it looks good, so.
And it's been being maintained?
Yep.
So, okay.
Is it appropriate then for us at this point to say, let's do that, or do we need to wait until later in the meeting?
I think that's part of what you need to incorporate as your total budget motion. That would be my sense of it. I don't know what your preference is, if you want to deal with these things on a one-by-one basis, or whether you'd rather just have it as a one-shot for everything type of situation. Thanks, Tom. Please confirm the most recent budget council received included a 2.5% increase, or decrease, excuse me. That was not a Freudian slip. The budget that was proposed and published in the newspaper does not include a 2.5% across the board decrease. The only items that got decreased were the contributions to the community organizations, which those were the first things that you heard right off the bat as we started the process.
So I'm confused because I am certain that I recall us saying to the community organizations, since we're going to request a 2.5% reduction from our departments, it's only fair that we request the same from community organizations. And now we're in this situation where we made that statement to the community organizations, but we did not follow through on what I thought was a pretty clear, if not, it wasn't a motion directive, but it was a very clear statement. And so I'm a little concerned that we've not done what we said we were going to do, and
I think there was it was speculative if the departments come in at 2.5%, then what does it look like for 2.5% on you? And if I remember right, you were the one that made that suggestion, but no other council members all agreed with that. We didn't have a
The statement was...
full council.
The statement was, it seems only fair that if we're going to, and not by me, it seems only fair that if we're going to require that or request that, can't remember which of those two words it was, of our departments, we should do the same for community organizations. So it was clearly out there that that was part of the thinking at that point in time. So I believe that since that statement was made in a public meeting, not followed through on, that we need to take responsibility for that and make a decision about whether or not we're going to require that of our community organizations, even though we did not end up following through with the certainly implicated intention. So anyway, we don't, not for discussion now.
But I want to remind, one council member making a suggestion, doesn't it not
No, I
include
understand
the
that.
entire
No,
council
we went to
to do
them
that?
and asked every one of them how they would live with a 2.5% rate. We
Right,
didn't.
but we
didn't
never
ask for it.
agreed to
I don't think
cut
there was
all
a-
the departments by 2.5%. There was never an agreement.
I don't believe that there was an agreement among the council to even cut the 2.5% from the community
No.
group organizations either. I think that it was definitely, what would you do? They told us
No.
what we would do, but I don't think there was no action that was taken.
Correct, but the statement was made, since we are going to ask our departments to come in with a 2.5% reduction, it seems only fair that we ask the same. So I'm clear that it wasn't a motion that mentioned that it was not a motion agreement, but we clearly implied at that point in time, and I think we just need to clarify that even though we clearly applied at that point in time, and we need to decide whether or not, because I believe that the community organizations are included in the budget with a 2.5 reduction.
What Councilmember Stevens is saying right now is correct. That's what is included in the proposed published budget, is a 2.5% reduction, which amounts to roughly $2,600 or $700.
So, however, that was actually not ever voted on
I
by the
understand.
council. We had one or maybe two council members, but I did not have a majority of the council that said to do so.
I understand, and that's why I've clearly stated twice now that I understand it wasn't.
So I think it's important when you say we as a whole did
Well, I'm
not.
trying not to.
You and one other maybe,
Yeah.
Rick and one other maybe, but we as a whole,
I understand.
it's
I understand.
not what happened, so.
I understand. However, the informal we apparently did end up saying something that resulted in our community organizations being held to a 2.5% reduction, whereas the informal we did not follow through equitably
That's-
with our departments.
I would agree with that
Okay.
it reduced the budgets to $2,000,
So-
and that's a discussion I can have with our CFO, because that was not the direction of the council.
So, thank you for helping me find the correct words for the informal we. I appreciate that.
Those correct words are still not there, Chris, because we as a whole, when we're speaking here, we means an entire council or a majority of the councilmen. That did not happen.
All right, I can
So-
point out specific council members, but that is not something that I'm willing to
Exactly.
do.
Can I ask a question? If Heidi asked if we were going to discuss each thing as it came up, and we kind of unofficially decided that it would all be part of one motion. So is that going to be part of the discussion when we do discuss, for example, the vehicle? When are we going to talk about that, I guess is my question.
This is way too much to do in one moment.
Well, I think it's up to the council. If one council member insists on discussing a thing one at a time, then they'll make that motion or they'll have that discussion. It was, I believe, the CFO just said, it's up to you, council. You can do it all at once or not. And I believe Heidi said, okay, we'll just do it all at once. I'm okay with that. And we moved on.
Okay,
so
Mayor, I move that we look at each item individually and keep a running tab based on what we decide on each item.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Bray and a second by Ortega.
It's just too, and I'll speak to it, it's just too long to remember what you took out way back when as you move forward. We need to be just adding things as we go.
So I have seen it done exactly as Councilmember Bray moved to do.
So just a minute, yeah. We have a motion on the floor, so let's vote on that motion and then you can finish your thought, if you will.
Our CFO's comments about whether that's
okay.
The only thing I would ask is that if there is the distinct possibility, and this happens as you legislate these things, that as you go through and you vote on each individual item, it may appear different than when you decide how you're going to vote on the entire package altogether. Puts me in a little bit of a difficult situation to ferret out how that works out. But having said that, I'm open to whatever the council's direction is in that regard. So.
Okay. So we have a motion by Bray and a second by Ortega.
Question?
Yes.
Rather than on the whiteboard, like writing each specific thing and asking him to come up with the specific, whatever 2.5 or whatever is off the cuff, can we just kind of put a little note out to the side that says, for example, number 4 on this list, please consider that when looking at the total amount that we would consider, and then if the council wants to say at the end, okay, we're wanting a reduction or an increase or whatever the will of the council is at the time of this amount, then it'll just be there for the finance department to know that they can go back to.
I don't think that gives any clarity to their process at all.
Yeah, I don't know that would.
Well,
I just don't think. I think we're supposed to make decisions.
It makes it hard for him to differentiate.
Well, but I think there's a difference in forming a budget and voting on the whole budget, and those distinctions can be made. You can say, I don't want that in there. And that's our if we got a majority of council says take something out, it's out. And that reduces the budget. If we say add something, it's added.
Okay. Yeah,
so,
I'm just trying to.
So the motion on the floor is to, motion by Bray, seconded by Ortega, to go through these questions individually and decide what is in or out of the.
Oh, and there will probably be more than this list.
Well, there may be, but yeah. So that's the motion.
If we're going to do the deep dive, we promised our people that we were not going to just take the $900-some-thousand without having discussion on it. I don't know that we can get there without having a detailed discussion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Connie, would you please call the roll? What?
I would feel better if I could get the answers to all of the list and see what other things might potentially be brought up as proposed things on the list before I would say for sure voting on. Does that make sense? Like, that's why I'd like to.
We might change our mind on one thing after we see something else.
I mean, I'm not trying to say, I mean, I feel pretty good about like that, for example, that number 4, the car thing, I feel pretty good about saying, yeah, if staff feels great about that, let's do it. But I'm just anticipating as I go through this, if we're going to take every single thing, there might be some that I'm like, I don't know until the end what I think. So I'm going to struggle a little bit.
Well, so how do you do your budget yourself? Do you take the whole thing and say, I want a car, I want a house, I want to go to vacation? Or do you eliminate things individually? Or do you mold things individually? I think we're in the process of molding individually. And then collectively we can, at the end, say, well, we saved this much, which we've done lots of times,
Yeah.
I'm okay with adding something else back, and that can be a separate motion again.
I was going to ask and maybe suggest a way, when I said this is too much for one motion, what I really meant is it's too much for one discussion. But to consider them all separately and as separate motions is also problematic for exactly
Well, I think they
the
have to
reason
count
you're
as motions.
saying. So what I was going to suggest is, rather than like having each one considered, can we make it a little less formal and just discuss each one? But then I do think we need to look at the overall picture too. And we might vote differently about one item when we hear about another item and hear the discussion. So can we keep sort of a informal vote on each item, but have one motion at the end as a formal motion?
So the motion on the floor is to go through these individually.
Yeah. And I want to go through individually to discuss.
Go through and vote individually on
I think you require a motion for each one of those. I don't think we vote on each one individually. I think when something comes up, when we make a motion, then it becomes our prerogative as council to discuss it and vote on it. If we don't want to do that, then we just pass on.
Okay. Connie, could you please call the roll?
What are we voting on?
Okay, so we're voting on, as we go through this list, whether or not we will take something out of the budget or not, if we remove it or not, is what individually what we're voting on right now.
Okay.
There's apparently differences of opinion, and so it's a matter of voting on everything here, compiling a list, and or whatever, but today, right now, this motion is to vote on everything individually. I believe that if a motion comes forward, I was just going to say, I believe
It's not
Councilmember Bray said you don't have to vote on every one of these.
We just vote, for example, we would vote on, okay, take $49,000 out because we've got consensus going that we've got a replacement vehicle. We don't have to come back and discuss.
So you don't have to come back. You can take a list and do that. You can vote it individually, and you don't have to vote on any of these at all. You can just pass on.
And by the time we get to the motion and trying to remember every detail we want to put in that motion, it's going to be very difficult.
But we also can't go back and change our minds if things shift as we discuss.
Yeah, we can do that too. You can add it till we approve a budget. You can always discuss and remove and put in.
So we just
But if it was
make
there
a
by
motion.
motion, it would require another motion.
Yeah, you require a motion to change. And then a discussion. Connie, could you please call the roll?
Gray,
Yes.
Ortega,
Yes.
Adamson,
I'm kind of okay with it, but I'm also trying to respect what our CFO just said, and I'm not trying to cause more issues for our finance department, so, no.
Cheatham,
Yes.
Lurick,
I'm going to say no, because I just want to reserve the decision until we've discussed all the items.
Stevens,
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay. In that context, I move that the vehicle be removed from the budget.
Second.
We have a motion by Bray and a second by Adamson to remove the vehicle from the budget. Connie, could you please call the roll?
I'm sorry, who was the second?
Adamson?
Gray,
Yes.
Adamson,
Yes.
Cheatham,
No.
Lurick,
Yes.
Ortega,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Just as a matter of clarification, technically, I will be taking both items
We
out of
just
the
saved
budget.
$98,000.
Thank you. Next item which we were starting to discuss was number 5. And there has been no 2.5% cut included in the budget across the board. There was a 2.5% reduction that was included for the community organizations. And that was based upon my sense of what the consensus was at the time. And that was included in the budget that was proposed. So
I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion to put the 2.5% back in for the community organizations and give them the full amounts that we talked about.
Second.
So we have a motion by Lurick and a second by Cheatham to add the 2.5 back into the community organizations.
And I have no problem with that because it was a false premise that we presented.
So Connie, could you please call the roll?
Lurick,
Yes.
Cheatham,
Yes.
Adamson,
Because most of the community organizations seem to indicate that they would be fine moving forward, and because we are still facing a deficit, my vote is no.
Ray,
Yes.
Ortega,
Because I believe that they can do more fundraising rather than asking for tax dollars, I'm going to vote no.
Stevens,
My memory says that each one of those organizations indicated that what we were asking was survivable. And since we're facing a difficult budget moment, I'm going to vote that we do that no. And I'm also going to make a motion that
Well, you
we,
can't.
Just
You
a
can't do
minute.
that.
Unless you're,
You just have
unless
to
you're
vote.
amending this one.
I voted no.
Yeah.
And now I'm saying,
You're
I have a
you're
motion.
done. You're done because
oh, I'm sorry.
it's a yes or no right now, and
I'm no.
it's a thing, so I'm a yes.
Slav,
So I make a motion.
So where did that leave us?
So that added the $2,000-ish back into the budget.
I make a motion that we, in an exploratory manner, for exploratory purposes, see what it would look like if departments came in with a 2.5% reduction.
How do we get that done by tomorrow?
yeah.
That's true.
I mean,
That's true.
I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, that's an
Right.
impossibility.
And that was the scenario that Jim showed.
All right, so
What it would look like.
I'll look for those savings elsewhere then. Okay, I rescind my
Okay,
motion.
motion's been rescinded. All right, let's move to agenda item 6. Or not agenda item, but question 6.
I'd be glad to go to agenda item.
Yeah, me too, there's not one.
Is that adjournment by any chance?
That's right.
Item number 6, question was, what do we have in the way of unfilled positions and what's the dollar amount associated with that? So the explanation is that there's actually 13 and a half positions, but technically 14 positions, but FTEs 13 and a half. The salary and benefits associated with those positions amounts to $931,428. That does not include any positions that are in the process of actually already having been filled.
So that doesn't include your position?
That's correct.
No, it was CFO exempt.
Okay.
And that, just as a matter of course, that amounts to roughly 2.5% of our workforce. Some of those positions are non-general fund positions, and most of them are general fund positions, but it still works out to around 2.5% of our workforce. And just parenthetically adding, if you were to make a motion along the lines of attrition being the basis upon which we would work towards a 2.5% reduction, that would be one way to do that within that context.
I feel like we're gonna have to discuss that, but I think this is one of those deals that we star and see where we want to come with it later in terms of attrition.
I agree with that.
I agree with that.
Do you have any agreements on that, or is there a motion that wants to be done?
Yeah,
Or?
that's like what I was talking about earlier, that some of these are hard to assign like a dollar figure to, and so put them on the radar for sure. I mean, I know if we come in and say, hey, we'd like to do that, that's immediately what the staff will look at is where could they possibly do that, but let's not make a motion about it right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my
Sounds-
position is I'm willing to wait
Sounds
for a
good.
motion to consider it, but I'm opposed to this idea.
Okay. Number 7.
So number 7, basically, I did not answer this question. This came from our planning director, and I don't see him here. He may be, he's behind the big whiteboard hiding.
Yes.
So I don't know if you'd like a further explanation from him, but I think he gave a pretty thorough response to that question.
And I understand and appreciate the extra explanation. But the reason I asked this question is that if you go back to the original PDA paperwork around Northgate, which you would have no way of knowing about, it did actually have a repayment, and estimated, because of course these things are always estimated, but it did in fact have an indicated increment schedule, and that was part of the sales pitch. And so the source of my question is, since that estimate is clearly out the window, based on just comparing the numbers in that estimated schedule and the realities, it clearly is no longer in the ballpark. And so I'm wondering what the ballpark might be, when we might know what the ballpark might be, because that schedule initially could have been used as a guesstimated based on what we actually see happening in terms of build out, could have been used in future budgets to create some potential leeway, and now it's just completely in limbo with nobody apparently knowing anything about what's going on financially there. So that's the real source of my question. So
that's a PDA. When will the PDA be reporting to the council on that? They do that on an annual basis, and I'm not sure when that comes up. We'd have to take a look and see when that comes up for them.
I believe, I mean, I've been on council for 12 months and a bit, and I am not remembering that we've heard from PDA relative to this at all during the time I've been on council. And so I just...
That's going to answer.
Brent McLean, Planning Development Services Director. We reported, the PDA reported to the council, I want to say January, February of this year.
Okay.
And that's typically when we do it.
Right.
We have that March 31st deadline.
Right.
And so that's when we did do our report to the council.
Okay, great.
But I don't think that report included
No,
what we
so
could expect to get back.
no, and
so that we
it
could consider
typically
it.
doesn't include those figures. And with the Northgate specific, if that's something you're looking for, it's going to require a new market study and a new projections, and that, you know, I think what you're going to find is it's not going to change a whole lot, except we have a kind of a delay because of COVID, and you know, things kind of shifted a little bit, but it's not going to change substantially.
So relative to budgeting then, do we just ignore Northgate and whatever comes in, however it comes in?
Well,
and
at
it's gravy?
this point, you know, the property tax you're getting from Northgate right now
It's ag.
is ag, and that's what it would have been
Right.
if the development never happened. It would have been added anyways.
Well,
I don't remember ever budgeting in anticipation to a TIF district, regardless of what that TIF district is.
Right, but if it don't, some TIF districts, and maybe I'm incorrect, but based on the research that I did, it appears that at least in some cases, a TIF district will repay the investing entities out of the increment that is created. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, when it closes and how that gels out. I'm talking about the fact that various entities, including the city, have put money into the TIF district.
Correct.
And it was my understanding that one use of the generated increment was to repay those. And so then based on the schedule that was included in the original study, it appeared that whether it's delayed or not delayed, there is increment that will be generated. And so my question is, what is the plan relative to repayment, in particular to the city? How is that handled? Do they get to just pick when they feel like it, or how is that? What is the plan?
So that's a good question. So typically the way it happens is there's a request made as increment is available. At this point, the Northgate District does not have any increment available, so there's no payment that could be requested to be made. And so, it's just waiting for that increment to come, and things are starting to develop in that area, and so you'll start seeing increment come. The amount of that increment is yet to be determined based on assessments, and so it is kind of a projection of what it might be, and so
the simple answer, Chris, is the city puts some money into it. The city is in the #1 position.
I understand.
The PDA will reimburse the city first before any others.
I understand.
When there's an increment, and typically on the fastest time period you would be able to get increment is about a 3-year period, because you set it, they build it, once they get the CO, that's when that tax starts on that.
So that would be next.
And so that would be, but then remember with COVID, what's happening too. So you're probably going to be at the earliest 4 years and possibly 5 years before we see any increment. So
that doesn't address the issue though of what is the plan for when there is increment, or is it who? Because if PDA reports in March, that's after we've set a budget and well in advance of considering a new budget. So does that money, whatever increment may be available, does that information just exist in its own silo, or does it factor into our budgeting discussions in any way? And I don't need an answer now. I'm just saying that I think it would be wise for us to have some kind of at least understanding with PDA about how that happens.
So, from a general budget best practices kind of theory perspective, as we become aware of items that could be, in this case it would be a revenue because it's a repayment of an expenditure that we had made in the past, when we are aware of that being at the point where we can actually make some sort of an estimate as to how much that should be, that should be included in that budget process. In this case, based on everything I've heard from an accounting perspective, I don't think we have any basis at all for knowing how much the increment is and how much would be repaid to the city. We do have a schedule that was produced for the PDA at their last meeting that shows a list of all of the organizations, including the city, that are owed money. I would think that there would be some process associated with the city making a claim against that increment as it becomes available. We can always do a budget amendment at that point, and that would be based upon additional revenues that were available above and beyond what was incorporated in the adopted budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Brent.
Next question, and I'm assuming you didn't want to take any action at this point.
No, but relative to answer number C, the best practice is to provide an annual report as outlined in state statute. When does PDA's budget year, are they on the same budget cycle as we are?
So they are on the
Yes.
same budget cycle that we are, and as Brent just mentioned, that happens in January, February time period. That they will make that report.
So they're, okay, so they close their books end of September, and then January, February, then they'll be doing the annual report,
Yes.
which will at least be an opportunity for financial questions to be posed.
Absolutely.
Well, and I would think that part of that would be that the taxes are paid on 2 basis points in June and December. And so they will have no idea come the end of the fiscal year what their basis point will be in December.
Yes, that's
But
correct.
You might be able to get evaluation of the buildings that have been built and what they look. If they open them and they get a CO this year, then before December 1, you might be able to get something there. But
Until the tax assessments go out, you really don't know.
yeah,
So what would be the most logical date on which to request a most current financial
I think
report?
if they're doing a report at the first of the year, they should have a printout, in theory, from the county that says this amount is due you. This is what we are assessing for you to go to your income. I don't know how it all works.
I don't know how the county works on that,
But somebody's got to collect the money before it goes anywhere.
Right.
And I don't mind anybody to take this the wrong way, but if we could stay focused on issues of actual numbers that we have to consider this year, because talking about when the PDA is going to present to us is not something that we have to consider right now for this budget. And so I just think that we just need to stay focused on hard numbers that we're going to decide yay or nay on, especially since there is no increment to discuss. Right. Okay.
And I'll just add this parenthetically. I believe there will be an estimate of the total amount of increment that will be received by the PDA by the time that the next annual report would be made, which most likely we're going to know by January sometime. And based on what I know right now, I doubt that there will be any budget impact to the city of Pocatello at that time.
okay, number 8. Number 8.
The question is related to the free clinic building. Ann Nichols went out and looked on Zillow and saw, we don't have an appraisal at this time, but she was able to see out on Zillow the estimated market value of that building as $209,000 to $229,000 roughly. And as we know, Zillow is sort of notorious for underestimating what the values are. So it very well could be even more than that. So I'm not, I don't know about the condition of the building. I don't have information related to that.
And this is a legal question. Can we sell that building, or does it need to go to auction?
That would have to be through auction.
So it would.
And right now, that building's under a contractual lease, so we would have to evaluate that and terminate it if the council so chooses.
Sure. But
Who's leasing that?
if Zillow says 209 to 229, it goes to auction and it sells for 10, then that's it.
Well, we can do it just like we did the other building.
Yeah, we could put a thing.
We could put a reserve on it.
We could put a reserve. If it does not sell, then it doesn't sell, so.
I say we investigate auctioning that building off.
I think it fits the same category.
Sure, I'll make a motion.
I second it. I think it fits the same category as extraneous properties. And, I just think that we've done that, and we've really worked at unloading some of these properties for the city, and this just isn't keeping with that.
So we have a motion by Ortega and a second by Bray to investigate auctioning off the old free clinic building. That's what it was, the free clinic building.
Mayor, if I may, before you vote on that, I do have a concern that the building is under lease. So I think before we jump to that step, there should be a discussion with the leasees.
Well, but has the lease has just been rolling over, it's not been re-signed or anything?
Well,
So-
it has an automatic renewal, but we're in the initial term of the lease right now.
No, we're in the, no, it was 2019.
Okay, so, but still, the lease is still legally effective right now. So I think the step before investigating auctioning it would
Okay.
be to
All right.
talk to the leasee
Or
and
notify them that
Okay,
make a determination as to whether or not we want to terminate the lease.
okay, then I'll rescind the motion for now. Next.
Well,
Okay,
I guess I
motion is-
rescind my second.
The motion and second have both been rescinded. Jeff, you,
Mr. Mayor, I believe there's also some issues with the deed on that property that we're trying to get sorted out and stuff, but since the motion's been rescinded, it's...
I was gonna say, I would think that all that would be kind of part of the investigation piece, but we'll,
I
That
will move
rescinded.
that we clean up our act on this building by looking at the deed and clarifying whatever needs to be done there, clarifying whether they're going to move forward with the lease, if it's an entity that's going to be there. And then we come back.
And do we have an estimate, could you include an estimated timeline in that? What would be reasonable?
I don't know. I
How-
can't give you a time.
You know, it depends on who died where.
6 months?
I can't commit to a date. I don't know how long it'll take.
I just think we need to be moving on it,
Right.
we need to be informed on it, and
So then, when you get something, you'll bring it.
so when we know what's going on with the building and our deed, then we should get something back. It doesn't need to be a motion or anything, but it just needs to be something that's on our attention span.
And I would,
okay.
the only thing I would say was, please, with everything else that is clearly on your plate, please, doesn't have to be top priority, but please don't let it be last hair on the dog's tail, because the longer we leave that property sitting there without doing the repairs and so forth that we advertise are becoming increasingly costly, we're just throwing money away.
And Council, I would encourage you to maybe consider having Big Mama's House administration come and talk to you, because the last information I received was that they were working on some of those deferred maintenance situations with the building, that they were getting a lot of community input and getting some free work done on the building that benefits them and quite honestly benefits the city as well. I think there's just a lot of information that we may not have regarding that building and its use right now before we start talking about terminating an existing and legally binding lease.
I think CDBG has been having some business.
Yeah, but actually, if we're leasing it for $1 a year, then I think they should come before us and tell us what's going on.
Okay, great, perfect. We'll move to agenda item, or not agenda, but question number 9. Stuck on agenda.
You have your own agenda.
That's exactly, I got my agenda here. It's only got 3 items and I'm already on 9, so.
Agenda item vis-a-vis question number 9 relates to a specific question related to a project. I believe that Jeff Mansfield answered that question. Jeff, did you want to expand on what you see here?
I've read it, I mean, I can read the info,
Yeah,
me personally, I don't know.
Yeah.
How much of this do we need to go through in detail if we got answers on it right here?
Right.
Just whatever the council's
council's
interested in. I mean, this was, the council asked these questions and we're making sure the council gets answered, so
Well, it's printed, I can read.
I'm not arguing that.
Does this, I'm moving on. Does the $300,000 include walls for the finance department, or is that just regular maintenance?
The walls for the finance
Right.
are not included in the 300,000 request, but are included in the Fund 78 proposed budget.
And I'm still like not clear, because I thought Richard, is he here?
Yes, he is.
Richard, you said that that was going to be an ongoing 300,000 annually? Is that right?
It'd be nice to start building a reserve and using it for other projects in City Hall
Okay.
to update, unless we're going to build a new City Hall.
That's your plan though, is to just sock it away unless, okay.
So this is a recurring expense?
Okay.
If the desire is to build a reserve, technically you don't need to appropriate that. We could just make sure that we have, instead of a deficit, we have $300,000 left over that we can put in reserve for that purpose.
Okay.
Any questions on number 11?
So what system do we have that people have been telling me is a DOS system for as recently as 3 weeks ago?
So if I might, while Chris is coming up to the microphone, I know he wants to answer that question. I'm not sure, I don't think I ever added any amplification or augmented the desire to say that we have a DOS system. We do not have a DOS system, and even in my antiquated view of things, I know that we do not have a DOS system. However, we do have a system that has, as far as I know, we've had it for around 20 years. It's been augmented over the course of time. Most old DOS systems you used to get green bar printouts from. We don't get too many of those anymore, so maybe all of the elements that would sort of indicate this was a DOS system are pretty much gone. But Chris, did you want to expand on that?
No, just a DOS system is an antiquated term for computers before Windows, basically.
Yeah,
we do not have a DOS system.
Okay.
We have a green screen that looks kind of like it would belong in a DOS system, but a lot of financial people like to work in a green screen environment because they're used to it and that they know how to manipulate it. And it just uses menus that they click on or they use function keys and things. Our system runs on an IBM I-Series mainframe computer using I-Series language. It's now in the cloud. It's very modern. Banks use it. A lot of government agencies use them.
So you can import and export data from that system?
Yes, ma'am.
And you can export it into spreadsheets, because I was told definitively, not by anyone present here today, but I was told definitively that that was not possible, which was the reason why reports that I asked for, information that I asked for, could not be provided without undue stress on staff, because they had to manually extract information from the current system and place it into Excel.
You have to run the analytics portion of the software, which is, it's not Oracle, it's, actually it's Oracle.
It's Cognos.
Cognos, thank you. It's Cognos-based. It has a very steep learning curve, and a lot of our staff do not know how to use that portion of it. But with help from the IT department and a few others, we can pull almost any report anybody needs. But it will take, it's not easy sometimes.
Right.
But the data is there.
Is there a plan in place then to get whatever training needs to happen so that reports can actually be produced without overburdening staff or making information unavailable because there's no good choice?
The training on Cognos is not cheap, but we did get a $20,000 grant for training that we are going to spend part of that for Cognos training.
And so you believe that this is the best software that a municipality should be using at this point in time is what we have?
I think it's the best that we have right now to be able to use without expending $1 to $3 million in 2 years of effort to get a new system that may or may not be any more enjoyable to use by staff.
So if money were available, would you recommend, and if we were instituting best practice in software, would this be the system that you recommend or another system?
It would be one I would look at. I've been looking at some others recently that I think are equally as good or better.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question 12.
Without belaboring any more the discussion that we had in number 11, one of the difficulties associated with number 12 is the software that we use and its reporting capability. And as Chris stated, there's a very steep learning curve associated with the reporting element module of our Central Square software. We use Cognos, but quite frankly, it doesn't export to Excel very easily. Requires, in some cases, you have to actually do a export into PDF, and then you have to convert that into Excel. And specifically as it relates to the budget iterations that we go through, it is very difficult to do this type of projections. And as it ends up, it's required us to rely very heavily on a person in the IT department to help us to be able to make these calculations. That said, we haven't really been able to delineate precisely what it is I think that you're looking for here. But I've tried to give the data in as much form as I possibly could. But again, I'm not trying to compound our discussion on number 11, but it would certainly help if we had better report writing software to be able to answer this type of question as well as any other question that you might have. That's my objective, is to give you transparency so that you are able to not only ask for reports, but you could generate your own reports as well.
Well, and it's just very difficult because nobody's trying to make staff's life miserable by asking for, and yet it's very difficult to not have information. And me personally, I just end up feeling as though I'm stuck in an untenable situation no matter which way I jump. And so, but thank you for this.
And I feel that's very unfortunate that any council member is put in a situation where they're not able to discern information as readily as they should.
So is your recent explanation about the report capability, is that what? Oh, never mind, I didn't read it all. I misread, I skipped a word.
Okay.
Never mind.
You know, in my working career, I worked with a couple of different software systems and computer systems. I always found queries difficult to create. I don't care what the program was. If you don't know the database in detail, you can't write the query. And we inevitably, I mean, we had one at the credit union I left that I worked hours and hours and hours of trying to figure out how to write queries, and I never was able to do that. And I consider myself fairly adequate when it comes to computer systems. So I don't know that changing to a different computer system is going to change that. Until those queries are written and they're available to be pulled, you got a problem. You can't just create a new query at the drop of a hat.
Well, I can appreciate that, and I'm not a computer expert, but I do know, for example, that at the school district, if I needed to, I mean, I never ran into a situation where I couldn't get the info that I needed rapidly, and in most cases, the school secretary was able to just go in and pull it out. So whatever they did,
they didn't do anything. Those queries were already there. You were simply requesting data that was already created in the query. And if you ask for new information, then somebody who knows that database intimately has got to go back and create it.
And I can appreciate that, but then perhaps, based on your expertise, perhaps what we need to be doing, especially in relationship to budgeting, is we need to be thinking about what are the reasonable queries, and perhaps then we need to be creating those so that when we come to a budgeting situation, we are able to get reasonable information, expectable information, without creating a burden for anybody. I mean, so I can appreciate, and I'm going to rely on your expertise. But then it seems to me there's also a solution indicated that we could pursue, and I guess I would advise that we pursue that.
So the horse is down on the ground, it's gasping for its last breath, but I'm going to give it one more kick. The reporting capabilities is exactly as Rick outlined. Having the query capability is absolutely imperative. I used exactly the same system. It wasn't called Central Square, but actually it was called Central Square. In my previous employment, I used the same query language, Cognos, but it was so much easier to use in my previous lifetime because of the basic way that the software had been designed. The name of the game nowadays is what can you do to get reporting capabilities? There's add-ons, and that's what I had suggested previously. The $200,000 cost is an add-on to our current system.
Thank you.
Thank you for gasping your last breath.
Okay, 13.
So I know this is a question that's been asked before, and I think the real question is, are we keeping up? Are we able to attract employees and retain personnel? There's a lot of different reasons why we're able to or not able to do so, one of which is how much we're paying people and whether it's up to what the market rate should be. I know Heather has a lot more information on that. It's a difficult question to answer within the context of what the budget would represent.
What is, on 14, what is the education benefit referred to?
We're still on 13 though right now, so let's wait to talk about 14 until we get there.
I thought you just explained it. Oh, 12.
No, he explained 13. I was waiting for a question because I'm a little surprised the council doesn't have a question. Okay, 14. Thank you. Sorry, Claudia.
What is the education benefit refer to? Again, can you?
It's the tuition reimbursement program. Employees sign up at the beginning of the budgeting process, which was like 47 years ago or January. And we get the amount that's been requested and we pull that by fund, and then it's housed within a fund the IT manages. If HR asks for money and we don't use it, it maintains in the fund. Someone else from the general fund can use it. Our enterprise funds are different. They have to be isolated. So what money we have in there versus the requests don't always match depending on the funding capability.
So it's not, it's tuition reimbursement.
Yes.
It's not,
no
it's
prepayment, it's payment.
It's not paying somebody a bonus because they got a bachelor's degree.
This is only for the tuition aspect.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And if you wanted to reduce that, the amount that's in the fund right now, it shows a $73,000 budget. If you wanted to reduce that, there would be a reduction in the contribution that comes from all the funds to bring it back down to that $44,000.
So I thought, and I could be so wrong, I thought that that line went up from the 73. But like I say, I can't find the sheet that I was looking at when I thought I was seeing that.
Well, Finance 3, which is what I call Jim's tenure, versus Finance 1 and 2, who manages that line has not always been decided upon. It's been housed in Finance. Neither Jim or I have a good working history on how that money got in there. We know there were the requests, but HR hasn't reconciled it, and I believe we just addressed this year's need, and we have not done any corrections to that account.
So wherever I saw 117, I was either dreaming or it's not in there. It's actually 73.
Yeah, I'm not recalling exactly the 117, but...
There's 73,000 you said in there right now?
So I think the question was correctly stated, back to 73 for balance, and I see, now I'm reading that differently.
Right.
Okay. I would have to research that a little bit more. I didn't read that
There
correctly.
wouldn't be any, I mean, it's either already in there.
I understand.
And therefore, if that's true, then.
I did not understand the question when I read it first.
Okay.
We have 73 and only 40,000. We're not going to live in the world.
Right.
Linda.
It's actually my turn?
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, because I think there's some confusion too, and maybe even among some of the employees, but I've heard from people in the public about the difference between training and education. and those are two different things.
They are.
And people departments have training budgets, but that is not the same thing as the education benefit. And that is established, as far as I understand, by the IRS. Like,
it is.
Those must be kept separate. And we do have training budgets for departments that are required to do certain training. But this is about people going out and getting degrees and getting reimbursed.
Yes, it's things they're choosing to pursue on their own that are not part of their city position function.
Tuition reimbursement.
Okay. Thank you. 15.
So,
back to 14.
I'm sorry, yeah. On page 89 of the budget, it actually does show 117,500. And if you desired to move that back to the lower dollar amount, there would be a savings of $44,000.
Okay, so I wasn't dreaming that's
No, you
news
weren't.
at my age.
Not at least on that.
So I would
issue.
like that to be a starred item, or I can make a motion now, but I'd like that to be a starred item that we come back to. Okay.
I got a star by it. 15.
So the answer to number 15 is that there was a reduction, and it was based upon me talking with the mayor about a $12,500 reduction in the mayor's and city council's budget. Not a 50%, but it is a $12,500 reduction.
What percentage is that?
Pardon?
What percentage is that?
I don't, it's more like 30, 35%
And
perhaps.
that leaves, because it was at 45.
Yes.
I think, and so if it's 30, I can figure that out. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Item 16, it's not a new item, it just, for whatever reason, there hadn't been any money put in the budget in this current fiscal year. They have expended money from that line item in the past. It's $7 per officer, as I understand it. The explanation is there.
So do we need, if we somehow covered that, but didn't use that line item?
I understand what your question is.
Okay, so maybe we need to.
That's one that, without going through the details, I'm not sure that I would be able to answer that question.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So before we hit 17, let's take a break for about 5 minutes.
Did you say 5 hours? No.
Probably, well, we know what 5 minutes turns into, but.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us after the break. We'll go ahead and get started. We are on question, not agenda. Question 17.
Number 17, I've given
I think it's fine.
this, yeah, I gave this to all of the departments, gave them an opportunity to talk about their training budgets. And you can see the responses vary from, yeah, we've got some of it available to, all of it available to none of it available. So.
And I noticed some of the responses didn't maybe notice the exception for trainings necessary to maintain licenses and ensure safety.
Right.
So some of the responses kind of addressed that, and that was already addressed in the question.
I just have a question. What training for sanitation, is it like driving up courses, like maintaining, to be able to drive those big giant trash trucks?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We have training for that, as well as some of the newer technologies.
Oh, okay.
Like routeware, stuff like that. The new asset management stuff that we've done, and keeping up on GPS technology and stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense that you would want to, make sure that driving gets emphasized on a routine basis.
So I may not have incorporated all of the responses on the clothing question, but quite frankly, there weren't a lot of responses back from the departments there. So, and I don't know that there's much in the way of potential savings there. And that's it as far as those questions go.
Okay, that's the, goes through all those questions. And I found, what? Yes.
So I don't know if every department buys clothing or not, but how does it work when some departments seem to have a line item for something and some don't? It has nothing to do with how you set it up. I'm just.
Right. No, it's a very good question, because I would liken it to, as an example, you go into the finance department and you see nobody that's wearing a t-shirt that says City of Pocatello on it. You go into some of the other departments and they do have reasons to have City of Pocatello shirts. Utility billing, for instance, they're viewed by the public. The police department, obviously, they need uniforms. Fire department needs lots of uniforms, different types of standards and safety associated with that. In the case of sanitation, I don't remember exactly what they do in the way of clothing and uniforms, but I know they need to have clean, and same with water and sewer, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the requirements vary from department to department. Quite frankly, I haven't looked at the policy to see exactly what the policy says about clothing and uniforms. So.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, I promised Roger that we would let him go through his thing, so.
At the budget hearing the other night, I talked a great deal about our financial policy and the forecasting that's important. I think forecasting is what keeps our city going forward. It's what makes it navigate from point A to point B to point C, and we've got to do better at forecasting. And it gives us insight on how we should plan. I think there are three things achieved by that. First, we make our employees more secure by letting them know what our plan is. And having a forecast plan lets them know the territory we expect to travel. I think departments are given instruction in terms of priorities they need to follow by the way we structure budgets, not just this year, but years out. And I think the citizens, the taxpayers, deserve to know the type of services we are endeavoring to provide, and most of all, how we will invest their money to provide a good return to them. Now, I've been influenced over the years by a lot of different things. Today I'm going to talk about two hens, Chicken Little and the little red hen. One of them went around saying the sky is falling, and really didn't get anything accomplished. The other one went around saying this needs to be done, this needs to be done, and when nobody else would do it, they said, well, then I will. And so she did, is the line in that children's book. I have attempted to frame a limited forecast and arbitrary forecast to anticipate what we're going to be looking at over the next few years. I need you to know, I boiled this down from a lot of paper to 14 slides. I said, that's too much. So I boiled it down to just 5 slides now, and I wish to show it. Now then, this works after all this time. This first slide shows you the projected wage and benefit increases. We really know what the fire will do, police sworn officers will do. We know what healthcare will do in 2022. I projected the other employees at 110% of what fire and police averaged out, or total. And it's arbitrary. I started out with 85, and then I realized some of our highest paid police officers weren't included in the list. Some of our highest paid firemen were not in the list. And I just arbitrarily assumed that we would split a little bit more to the other people in the city. And I tried to keep everything equitable. In 2000, so the wage and benefit projection I have is $1.3 million. 449,923. 2023, that jumps because healthcare, we've been told, is going to go up big time. So we have several factors in there, the 110%, but we know that healthcare, and we've been told, our consultant was here and told us that we can expect at least a 20% raise next year. And so I took that's $1.2 million just in healthcare costs next year. And so that came out to this total of $2,764,919. 2024, I didn't do healthcare as much. I don't think any of us can tell where healthcare is going, so I said 14%. Dropped it from 20 to 14%. And then the 2025, it's not near as defined because I had to make an assumption. 110% for fire and police. I had to arbitrarily calculate what fire is because we don't have a contract that has that spelled out. I looked at the trend that was going on between the years 2022, 2023, and 2024, and I saw that there was a trend where it looked like if I estimated the fire to be about 73% of the police, that it would come out pretty close to what the trend line was going. So I came up in 2025 with a 2.240042 projection for wages and benefit increases. In 2025, I dropped down to 10% on the health care. Now, I know these numbers are arbitrary, but at the same time, I will say that they're better than what we have anywhere else. I can be 50% wrong and still be as close as we are right now. And I can't be all that wrong because some of those numbers are fixed. I also looked at what growth in taxes would do, and this was really complex because I took slow growth, moderate growth, aggressive growth. I had 3 residential sizes of houses in that, what I would call a moderate house valued at $222,000, I think it was. Another house valued at $325,000, and another house, I had 4 houses. I had another house category valued, I think it was $450,000, another one at $650,000. And when I looked at this, I also had to park those houses and anticipate commercial growth at the same time. We know that whatever goes into TIF districts really has no impact on our taxes at this time and over the next few years. What we had, I had to separate it out, and it separated out about 45 were non-TIF district areas and 55% to the TIF districts. That's assuming, for example, that the Northgate TIF will gain a lot of momentum and that there will be some big commercial investments up there. But you also got to calculate what each one of those houses would be getting in a homeowner's exemption, which is $125,000 off of the higher priced house, and it's half the value of $111,111, I think, on the $222,000. So I put all that stuff in there, and then I said, let's just assume an aggressive tax growth or build-out growth for Pocatello. So aggressive growth in 2022 would produce about $413,109 in new taxes. I used also, if you can't read the little orange thing, I used the 2019 levy rate because that's the only one we got. It's real accurate. The 2020 levy rate was screwed up in lots of ways. So I dropped back, and they're very close based on what our projections were as well. So I then said, okay, if this is what the level is in 2022, let's take aggressive growth on out, 125% over the year before. And it still kept in the categories of the TIF districts, non-TIF districts. That came up with totals, and I just listed the new taxes because I've got increments on another sheet, and I can show you all the work I've done. But I came up with what I thought we could expect if aggressive growth occurs as new construction to be added to our taxes in each of these years. I have this handout to pass out to you, because this is a one-shot type thing. Those two pretty good. So that's for you. And this is a chart that shows you that growth isn't paying for growth. Because if growth was paying for growth, we're upside down. This is how much we are upside down in each of the years. 1,069,000, 2,351,000, 1,958,000, 1 million. I realize I can be way wrong, but we got to know where we're headed if we're going to address the things that we need to be addressing in the next few years. So I'm making this short and simple. The total difference between an anticipated tax revenues generated by new construction, if we have aggressive growth over the next 4 years, is estimated to be $6,974,519 differential. This negative difference will have to be made up by increasing reliance on the taxpayers, or making reductions in expenses, or a combination of the two. This does not chart a lot of the other parts of our budget. For example, there are 73 things that we have not even addressed in terms of the list that was brought to us. And that, my guess would be, it's about $14,800,000 roughly that's not addressed in this. So the last thing I have, because I was trying to really save you guys a lot of, an owner-occupied house valued at $200,000 in 2019 paid $994.56 in Pocatello property taxes. That's only Pocatello property taxes. If the inflation rate averaged 3% for each of the following 3 years, the owner should be paying $1,086.78 in 2022. However, the same homeowner whose house is now valued at $275,000 in 2021, and if we have no change in the levy rate, will be paying $405.06 more than they were just in 2019, only to Pocatello. Theoretically, it will take a levy rate reduction of approximately 27% in 2022 to approximate an inflation rate of 3% a year for this particular house. That would put them in a little bit over the inflation rate, if it was 3% for all 3 years, at $1,089.04. This is the context in which we really have to operate. It's the context of knowing what we're spending, knowing how it affects what we can do with our capital improvement plan, and knowing how it affects taxpayers. And I ran into a lady just the other day after the public hearing who told me, I'm acquainted with her not very well, but she said, if my taxes go up anymore, we're going to have to move. We've lived in this house for years and years and years. And my husband, we thought we were secure in getting retirement. We had savings set aside. He became ill. We've consumed what we thought was our safety net and savings. And so if taxes go up dramatically, we're going to have to sell, and we don't know if we can stay in Pocatello or not. So I'm just bringing this out there. This is part of the context in which we've got to operate. So when we look at the bogey of $900,000 and something that we started with, it has an effect on how we're going to take care of our employees. It has an effect on how we're going to be able to do the things we need to do to maintain our city. And it has a spillover effect on how it affects the people who own the houses who want to live in Pocatello. All of them have to be considered. And so my question, I don't know if I go back. My question really was on the other thing. What are we going to do? Because it's not going to be easy to, I got the wrong slide. It's really not going to be easy to fix all that we need to fix going forward. And so we're going to have to do the heavy lifting. We're going to have to decide how much we really think taxpayers should have. We have to think, how much do we really want to invest in our city in terms of what are we going to prioritize to do? Prioritizing usually involves taking something away and giving it to something else. You're not prioritizing if you're really not saying there's a structure and this has to go down while this one goes up. And I think we're going to have to do the two, because I really think we've made a commitment to our employees, and this commitment goes way, way back to when we changed some of our compensation and things like that. We're trying to make our employees whole, and we've got to find a way to keep our employees whole, to keep our city whole, and keep our taxpayers whole. And that's all I wanted to do, was provide a context. If you want me to clarify it more, I'd be glad to do it.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, council? Thoughts?
We're meeting tomorrow on this too.
Right, yes, it's on our agenda.
Okay. I think we've got to really consider the attrition part of this. And the attrition part would be what we can do without so that our employees can do it more. Many businesses do that. I think there's some discussion we've got to have on what right sizing might mean for the city of Pocatello. I don't think any of us are schooled enough, educated enough to know what that would look like. Maybe we need to call in some consultant in that area. We just got to get to doing the things we need to do, because we're following a path that can blow up on us if we don't use good judgment and light the way on that path.
But real quick, I have to leave, but I have 6 things to talk about tomorrow with regard to in and outs on the budget, just so everybody knows.
Okay. Go ahead, 2 hands here. Linda?
I just wanted to make a general comment, and I'm sorry, Jim, but I'm going to make one tiny correction to a comment that you made in the beginning, that when you were talking about the public testimony and you said that no one specifically spoke in favor, I heard differently. Everyone who got up there actually used the words in favor of the budget or in support of the budget. So I think it was pretty clear that that's what they were saying. But in a more general sense, what I heard from people, and if you include all the written testimony we got, what I read in those emails and what I heard from people that night was that they're not in favor of cuts, that they do not want a slash and burn approach to the budget, and that they feel strongly that we need to invest in this community. And that is the only way that we are going to have a thriving economy. And, you know, the saying, a rising tide lifts all boats, that, you know, there are people in the community that are struggling, but the best way to help them is to, you know, make the economy thrive and make the community thrive and bring in good jobs and all of those things. Those will help the people. And also then provide services to help people in other ways as well. So I think the general sentiment that I'm hearing is that people want to invest in this community, that they're willing to pay their taxes. I heard from many people that said they're willing to pay more in taxes as long as they're getting good things for their money, and they feel like they are. But I think it's a question of quality of life, and what kind of quality of life do we want to have in this community. And a community that can't fix its roads, or that doesn't have parks, or doesn't maintain its parks, or doesn't have a library, or doesn't, all these things add to the quality of life here, and then that makes a better economy and makes even the people that have been struggling, it makes things better for everybody. So that's where I'm coming from with this budget. I think the approach needs to be very responsible, but it's about balance. It's not just about, what can we cut? It's how do we balance the most responsible and reasonable taxes with providing the services and the amenities that uphold a good quality of life in the community. As well as, one more thing that has to be part of that equation is the employees and taking care of the employees. And I would add that the employees are, as we've said before, they're a subset of the tax-paying citizens. So the employees themselves are community members who invest in the economy and contribute to the economy, but they're also the people who are providing service to the people of this community, including their own families in many cases. So I think that it's not just about paying them fairly. I mean, that is important too, but I think when we separate it out as in, do we take care of the taxpayers or do we take care of the employees? I don't see that it's an either or. Those are, intimately combined in a way that you can't make that separation or make it an either or. I think that's a false premise. So the employees are the ones who actually, we make the decisions, but they're the ones who actually provide the service to the community. And do the work. So I think they're absolutely critical to this equation, and it really is about finding a balance between all our different obligations. One of those things is keeping taxes as reasonable as possible, but that is not the only thing that we have to consider. And I just think some of the cuts that that have been mentioned, let's say, because we haven't actually considered any of them. But some of those that have been put out there, I think would absolutely be devastating. It would be devastating to all of us who live here and just not good for this community. So that's where I'm coming from with this budget. And it's really about finding the balance between all the different obligations that we have.
Okay, Rick?
Mr. Mayor, Roger, I really appreciate your slideshow. I agree with you. I think we have to find a combination of controlling expenses and finding ways to increasing revenue, using grants and using other, and I think our staff is really good at that sort of thing. We've got about a $37 million tax ask, and we've got a $128 million budget, and I think that's exemplary of what our staff does throughout the city. But I'm going to make a motion that we adopt the budget as proposed and as modified here with the change to the car for all funds except the general fund. I'm going to propose that we reduce the general fund amount to $37,676. $37,676,629, and let the mayor and city department heads find those savings within their budget by August 19th for publication and proposal of the final budget.
Second.
And I make that motion because I went through this. I've got about 18 hours invested in looking through this thing item by item. And I see a lot of the department heads made their budgets the same way I used to make mine. Go through and look at what you spent 3 or 4 years ago, and then 2 years ago, and 1 year ago, and this year you project a cost, and you're not sure, so you bump it by a few thousand. And it looks to me like when I see those giant numbers rounded off to even thousands, that those probably aren't finite numbers. They're best guesses. And if they really sit down and looked at those figures, you probably could trim a grand here and a grand there. Almost every department has projected increases in water costs, sanitation, natural gas, and electricity. And as to the best of my knowledge, we aren't proposing any changes in any of those things. So there's probably a little could be trimmed off here and there, and it won't take much. If every department gave somewhere around a 1.5%, we could be there very easily. So that's the motion I'm making.
And second.
So in that motion, you mentioned that we would get together and have that trimmed off and done by?
By publication date, August 19th.
By the ordinance date?
Ordinance time, yes, ordinance time.
So you're just suggesting provide the ordinance?
Yes.
Okay, so to prepare the ordinance with the general fund reduced by whatever that is, I think it's at 38 million now or something, I don't remember what that was. And have that ordinance prepared for there, and then in the motion I thought I heard that you wanted us to find that, whatever that deduct is, within a week.
Yes. The one department I got together with, we did it in 30 minutes.
Okay.
Would it include you mentioned the truck that we took out?
It's off.
Right, but also the 2,000 roughly for community orgs. I just wanted to mention that.
Added that back in?
Yeah, those were the two things we changed.
Okay. Chris, you got your hand up?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's necessary to make it clear that the budget as published and the budget that we've discussed contains absolutely virtually no reductions and certainly no slash and burn. And as the mayor correctly pointed out, and you carefully chose your language, but there has never been from this body anything even vaguely approaching slash and burn cuts. So I just want to help the public understand that no such action has been taken and no such cuts are in the budget. The second point I want to make is that I believe, based on our CFO's repeated affirmations, that we have some critical budgeting issues to contend with over the next few fiscal years. Based on what I've seen today from Roger, I believe that we need to strongly consider the attrition portion before we vote yes to adopt a budget, because we may very, very, very well be able to protect employees, current employees, if we look very carefully at what we can achieve by not filling positions that currently do not have a human being in them. Now, I understand that some of those positions may need to be considered. I get that. But I think we need to have some commitment to not filling positions that currently will hurt no one in terms of their personal income, their health benefits, their family's economic stability, because I do not want to give up that opportunity only to find ourselves next year being in a situation where we actually have to eliminate positions and hurt real people who are trying to support their families. I feel that I can't go there, because if I have an opportunity to protect somebody by making a much less painful and personal choice this year, That is where I want to be. That is where I want to be, because I've been downsized out of a job. I totally know what that feels like, and it is not a misery I would wish on myself or anybody else. I would rather be safe than sorry.
The cuts that I'm talking about, I didn't even look at anything involving personnel. I didn't look at salaries, health benefits, social, any of the things involving people. These are all very simple little things that suddenly, when you add up a few dollars, amount to real money.
And I mean, I agree with you, Rick, I do, but I think based on the projections, based on what we know, even just from our collective bargaining agreements, and then trying to do equitable adjustments for the general employees, which I think is the right thing to do. I don't know that next year, I don't know that we will have expended Fund 78. We won't have the same kind of extra money that we have to apply to balancing the bottom line this year. We won't have that next year. And I think we have got to start looking at protecting the jobs that currently are filled this year in order to be as sure as we can be that those people are stable and secure. Because the way it looks, and again, based on comments from our HR and CFO, that the hens are coming home to roost. And I don't want to do that by damaging people's earning ability. I'd rather be safe this year.
So I got Linda and then back to Rick. Then Roger.
Completely agree, and I've made it very clear from the beginning that I'm absolutely not willing to look at any kind of cuts to employees, to people. I think we are understaffed. I think our staff are underpaid. So that to me is just not even an option. But one part I will maybe disagree with is the idea that, so I just want to make that clear, because to me that's off the table, and this proposal or this motion doesn't suggest any cuts to people. So I think our employees are safe and on stable ground, to use your words. The part that if we don't fill positions that are open, that doesn't hurt anybody, I disagree with that idea, because I think that it hurts our ability to provide service. And it also puts an added burden on current employees and departments. They're often doing the work of more than one position. They're filling in for those missing people. So I just definitely want to keep jobs safe and keep them, keep the employees that we have. And they do their jobs really well, but I think they could do their jobs better if the departments were properly staffed. And there are a lot of empty positions that are critical positions that absolutely need to be filled. And to me, that does have, you know, the idea that it doesn't hurt anybody, I think it does do some harm. It harms our ability to serve the public fully and properly. And it also does, it overtaxes employees. So that part, I'm not quite in agreement with.
Rick?
The motion I made still will leave us somewhere around $250,000, $275,000 short of a completely balanced budget. But I think the attrition that naturally occurs within the city and the time that lapses between the time an employee leaves and we replace that person will easily make up that difference. We see it every year as funds are transferred into balances. Everybody has a little leftover money here and there, and that doesn't seem to be a lot. The other thing is, revenues in the future, who knows what they're going to be. We can talk about property taxes, but a considerable portion of the revenue for this city comes from outside sources. And I think we saw what the legislature did last year with House Bill 389, and now they're setting on almost $1 billion in surplus revenue at the state of Idaho. And whether down the road the revenue sharing formula for financing government in this state, I think we need a comprehensive reform. And if that happens, it could make Rogers' numbers dramatically different because we just don't know. And my crystal ball is certainly not good enough to forecast what our revenue for this community is going to be outside of property taxes within our own city. And I got to say too, when I was going through these numbers, some of the departments did an incredible job. I mean, their numbers are right down to the dollar. And it was very hard to find a place to say, gosh, maybe you could take a little out here and there. Others, maybe fudged a little more than they possibly could have been. But overall, it's not a bad document.
Well, we'll make sure everybody pinpoints their dollar amounts in the future, Rick.
That's right, down to the dollar, guys. No more than 0 zeros.
I think the council historically has said we want everything rounded. We don't want it not. So maybe a bad precedent was set at that point. Roger Bray and then Chris.
Yeah,
you got
I appreciate what's been said, but to me, to protect our employees that we have to look at attrition. Because if we do not use attrition, we had an example, one request here showed about $1 million that could be harvested, so to speak, if we used attrition. And these weren't essential positions there. I think we're going to have to do that because every time somebody gets a raise, every time their health care goes up, all those things are consuming and consuming and consuming. Labor is the largest cost we have. And if we do not control labor costs in any way, we're not controlling this budget. One of the things that I think is important for us to do is to take a look at and when I talk about right sizing, nobody knows what right size is for Pocatello, but there are groups that can do that. That we could spend some money, and we may be undersized in some areas and oversized in other areas. My concept of right sizing is you don't fire anybody. We just create lanes in which they can move to other jobs that are targeted. And you use attrition if you're oversized. You use attrition to get right sized. I think it protects employees in the long run if you manage that. We have used attrition time and time again. The council has been empowered to always consider whether a position that is vacated is a necessary position, and we let the department come in and advocate for that position. And essential services are really kind of grandfathered. They don't get touched in that. But it doesn't hurt us, I think, to take a look there, because it will help us. I don't know how we can, if we are in the same tax bind next year because of the state, and the idea that they'll give something out in a non-election year is pretty, or it is election year next year. Who knows what they will do, but they tend to give it out not to municipalities. They tend to serve their own career, and they give it out in terms of income tax reductions or something like that instead of sending it on to where people are hurting with property taxes. So I think our job here is to manage our budget best we can and to manage it for our employees, to manage it so our city, we got to consider that other side. If we are all happy without doing anything, we're not even beginning to address that long list of priorities that we have. So all of the things have to be in balance, and I just think that we need to take a look at how we can appropriately size Pocatello. And I don't know what the answer is, but we can work on it.
Chris.
Yeah, I feel compelled to make it very clear that I was very clear And I over-defined in excruciating detail what I meant by not harming employees. And I talked about people who are currently in positions, earning money, and losing their job would destabilize them and their family financially. So I was very clear about that. Believe me, having been in public education for 23 years, where they just tell you you've got 2 fewer teachers and 3 more curricula to teach, trust me, I get the do more with less concept. I understand the stress, I understand the strain, but I was very, very clear about my definition of not harming employees, and I need that to be in the record and in front of the public very clearly.
Okay, so I'm not going to say a whole lot, but I can just say there's not a whole lot that's been said that I really truly agree with when it comes to attrition and things like that. You are a legislative branch. When you start talking employees and reducing and removing employees and things like that, you're moving into the executive branch. So I want to be very clear. Roger's right. I did acquiesce some authority to the council years ago that they had an opportunity to weigh in on every hire and stuff like that. We did that for 6 or 7 months, and then the council came to me and said, why do we keep getting these? We don't want this. You take care of it. I pulled it back, and I am not ever going to give that back up. It is day-to-day operations on what and how many people we need there. And if you think for a second, this council believes for a second that every department head does not have to justify every position that they have to rehire, from part-time scorekeepers to a senior equipment operator, then you're being misled, because they have to, in detail, justify every one of them. And then that decision is made. That is a day-to-day operations. And if I'm going to look at my attorney, if I misunderstand that, then correct me now, but I have no intention of running every hire past this council. I want to be clear, and I want that on the record as well.
So Mayor, as this discussion was happening, I referred back to Idaho Code as it refers to the mayor's administrative official duties. And it states, I'll just read the relevant parts. I'm in Idaho Code 50-602. It states the relevant portions. The mayor has the superintending control of all the officers and affairs of the city. So I would agree with your assessment of that code section as it relates to personnel issues and administrative official decisions of the mayor.
Okay, so I just want that clear. But that being said, I don't want a big deal out of it. Don't need another big discussion on it. I do have another question because I have some concerns. We have a motion on the floor. That motion has been made and it has been seconded. I have, and I'm okay with voting on it. We changed this meeting from Monday to Wednesday so we would have a full council here. One member of our council has left. It is on our agenda tomorrow. Is there any, I mean, do we vote on it? Because we do have a quorum. Yep. And then tomorrow, please walk me through this tomorrow because it is on our agenda.
Well, okay, to answer the first part of your question, there is a motion on the floor and a second. I would say a vote is appropriate because you do have a quorum of the council.
Okay.
As far as tomorrow's meeting, that is an agenda item that has been noticed for tomorrow's meeting. You do have control of the agenda, and you can remove that from the agenda, or you can keep it on the agenda in case there's any further questions or follow-up. But depending on the result of the vote of the motion that's on the floor, it will definitely impact tomorrow's discussion one way or another.
Okay, Roger, you have a question on that?
Yeah, when Claudia left, she said she had 6 items she wanted to bring up tomorrow. I don't think that it's fair to move ahead and just rule her out for her participation at that level.
Well, I think it's important enough to have a full council on here. We did move it, and to make sure we had a full council. We've got it now. I'm okay with a vote, but I don't feel good and comfortable pulling it off of the agenda tomorrow. Because she said 6 items. I don't know what happens with the items, but.
If you've already voted, it's a moot point, who cares?
But we do have it on the agenda.
I mean, I don't know why we would discuss anything tomorrow if
it's been voted on.
I mean, that makes no sense. And I mean, she had a medical appointment for her dogs, and she tried to change it, and they said it'll be another month and a half if you change it, and that wasn't going to work. So it's not. So I mean, I don't see any reason. If we vote and the motion passes today, then I don't even see why we meet tomorrow, frankly.
Well, we have our meeting tomorrow, and it will be on the agenda.
This would be an agenda item. I mean, there would be no.
It will be on the agenda.
I think we'd leave it on the agenda. I'd like to hear what Claudia has to say. And that's not to say that we can't make another motion tomorrow that in some way amends whatever action we take today.
True.
Yeah, I would also be very interested to know what Claudia has to say. I know you, Mayor, and our finance department have asked at almost every budget meeting that if we have questions or ideas about where we could have cuts, that those could be emailed so that the staff has time to prepare, as was done today, responses to those. So I guess I'm a little bit confused. If Claudia's listening, which she probably is, why she waited until now to bring up that list and didn't email it when it was asked for before, and then left the meeting, which we specifically discussed as a council previously about the time. So I'm a little bit confused by that, but the biggest thing that I see today is I've listened to everybody talk and share their feelings. It seems like everybody's really, even though you think you're not, on the same page. What we all want is for the budget to be balanced and to move forward and to have our city continue to be the great city that it is. That's what I think everybody's goal is. So obviously, with the motion of instructing the city administration, which includes all the department heads in the finance department, the mayor, they can look at a variety of ways to do that. Rick has a list that he can provide. Claudia has her list that she can provide. Obviously,
I don't know that it's a list. She just said
she had 6 questions or something.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I would just say that
let's
just adjourn and pick up at this very point tomorrow when she can ask her questions or whatever. There's no urgency getting the vote out today and leaving somebody out.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
I have a very simple question. I didn't hear the amount that Rick said in his motion.
37,676,629.
37 what?
37,676,629.
And that would be the amount of the expenditures?
Yes.
For the general fund?
For the general fund.
So someone who loves math, what does that have us taking of the 3% then?
Sorry, I wasn't quite that fast.
Sorry, that's an on-the-spot question. I apologize for that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding we're voting. But basically what I'm saying is, working as a team, the city can come to a great way to move forward. Some amount of attrition may be logical. For example, as much as we love and desperately need a CFO, we know that you're going to be leaving us, and so that's going to be a position that will remain unfilled for a time. So, it will ultimately get filled, but there can be some savings in those types of areas that could be considered.
Sure.
I would imagine that the motion that was made did not prohibit departments from suggesting something along the lines of what you are indicating, and with the idea that that position might never get filled again within that context. So that's 1.75% that would be a 1.75% reduction in the general fund expenditures as proposed, not taking into account this 49,000. So, and I'm assuming that that reduction.
I'm just going to throw this, I want the 49 back so that we can help us with the 500,000, whatever it is.
So I think that was a speak now or forever hold your peace. Sorry, but.
Because this isn't going to be an easy task, but.
So, yeah, I don't know whether that was included within the context, and if you're not taking a vote tonight, I don't know that it matters.
Well, I think it's responsible for us to vote. I am disappointed that we left, and I think that we'll have it on the agenda tomorrow because I think it's important to hear this, and if there's another motion to do something else, then we'll live with that, but.
Now I'm confused. I thought that we removed the accidental second entry.
We did. We did.
And I thought we removed the
Everything.
Yes, we did.
We did.
Yes, we did.
So with that in mind.
I was just saying I want it back because I've got 500, I've got whatever it is, $1,000 that I have to
now
find.
I'm really losing my mind.
That was a $100,000 fix for me.
To some
right
extent,
there.
I wouldn't mind holding my feet to the fire and your feet to the fire and say that it was incorporated as part, it wasn't incorporated as part of your motion, but that we would reduce expenditures by an additional 49,000 beyond what you had suggested? Or
I'm just
motion?
saying, let's get the general fund at 37,676,629. I don't care how you get there.
But you did mention the truck in your motion.
Yeah, because it will bring that number down to like 808.
Yeah.
And so then this is, I don't know what the actual total reduction amounts
That's
to.
fine.
But there's still going to be another couple of $100,000 that's going to have to come in the long term during the year in order to meet that budget.
But how do we
budget that?
How do we
Pardon?
pass a balanced budget if we're relying on something that's going to come from some undesignated something or other?
We will need to designate it. We'll figure that out.
And I guess that's where what I'm hearing is that let's rely on the experts who work for the city, who know best where some of those areas could be, and so that we're not, putting our pet projects in or our, personal opinions in. We rely on the experts of the city to help accomplish that, which they're very capable and competent people that will be able to manage that.
So we'll do kind of what we did last year where we adjusted some numbers up in order to make it balance, and then they luckily balanced out but didn't come out the way we adjusted them. So we'll just say, well, we're going to count on the fact that we're going to have this much less personnel costs just because we think we will, and we'll make those because those are the only kinds of, if it's not real dollars, then all you can do is, make those kinds of assumptions, right? So I'm just trying to understand what it is you're proposing.
I don't understand what not real dollars mean.
Well, if we say we're gonna adjust, we're gonna say that this was our original personnel, bottom line personnel number, but now we're just gonna reduce it by 200,000 because we think that it will reduce itself by $200,000. If you don't have revenue to match your expenditure,
But we're not saying that it would just magically reduce itself. We're saying we would rely on the experts at the city, the department heads who know to find that.
But we've just heard that it's very, very, very difficult with our software to do those kinds of projections. So maybe this was a different kind of projection and it's easier to do it with our software, but I thought I heard that these kinds of hypothetical run scenario type projections are very difficult to do currently with our software.
But the other half of that, Chris, is revenue. And when you look at the revenue projections, particularly from the state revenue sharing formula and the various sources we have, Jim's used some pretty conservative numbers, as he should. And I fully expect our liquor tax, our sales tax, with the huge surpluses the state's saying, I fully expect those are going to go up. I honestly don't think we're going to be short. But you never know, and we won't know until probably next March or April. When we get close to the end of the year, we should be able to look at those formulas, look at our property tax distribution, and be able to project then more closely, so that if we need to, the mayor and the department heads will be able to make last quarter some adjustments to make things work out to a balanced budget.
I got a question.
Okay.
There's two questions. Does your budget anticipate balance, structurally balanced between revenue and expenses, or is it assuming that there's unforeseen revenue that will come in?
Both. I think by the end of the year, I think we will be balanced. That's the job of the mayor and the department heads.
But my question then goes to Jim. How do we do a balanced budget? Because we have to estimate in our budget what our revenue will be. And if we're counting on some unforeseen money to come in, how do we budget for that?
I don't think we're trying to play a semantics game here, but what I heard was from Councilmember Cheatham was that he believes the budget will be balanced by the end of the year based upon additional revenues. But I did not hear in his motion anything along the lines of increasing revenues, because quite frankly, I would have a hard time increasing revenues since I've used the estimates that I got from AIC. Those are the numbers that I put in the budget. I didn't get an estimate on interest, for instance, but I am very conservative on interest. Within the context of what Councilmember Cheatham has moved, it would not technically be a balanced budget. It would incorporate remaining deficit in the budget itself.
Can we do that?
Well, so I knew that question was going to be asked because I conceived that we might be at this point.
I'm trying to understand what you could do, what Rick's proposing, and what.
So there's two guiding principles here. One of which is I am obligated if we get to the point that we have there's any question about our ability to meet to stay within the context of what our appropriations are, I am obligated to stop making payments from the Treasury. That is a statutory obligation that I have. I have to say we will exceed our budget and therefore we have to stop making payments. I would have to make some decision, and I would propose that to the City Council along the lines of we're going to exceed our appropriations if we continue to spend this way. So it has to be a real dollar budget that we can abide by. The other guiding principle, which you have pointed out as it relates to our financial policies, say that we have to have a balanced budget. It does say we can use fund balance to help balance our budget, with the idea that it would be one-time type expenditures to do so. And I'm not trying to say anything else other than that financial policy is a guideline. I would probably move in the direction of revamping the financial policies to say that not only shall you stay within those guidelines, but if for some reason, based upon the context of the budget process that you're in, that you have to stray off, that there's a plan devised to bring you back into balance within a certain period of time. That's the way I've seen it done in the past. So you're not prohibited from not having a balanced budget. You did pass a resolution that has a financial policy, but it says very clearly those are guidelines to follow.
So what I'm hearing you say is, yes, it will be a balanced budget because we could go to reserve funds to balance.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, then, with that, and I am not going to remove it from the agenda tomorrow, we have a motion by Cheatham and a second by Lyric. Connie, would you please call the roll?
Cheatham?
Yes.
Lyric?
Yes.
Adamson?
May I just quickly ask a question of Jim? Do you feel comfortable with this motion and being able to move forward with your expert opinion? Is this acceptable and a good way to go for our city?
I believe it's a good way to go forward. I don't think it's an absolute way to approach future budgets, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
Okay, then yes.
Greg?
I'm going to vote no, because I think we should have the full council here, and we should have informed her that we were going to move this direction.
Stevens?
No, because I don't think this budget does what it needs to do to protect our employees in the future.
Okay, so motion passes, and so what we'll do is start down the road today, whenever you start the ordinance. I might wait until tomorrow after we address this on the agenda a little bit, but the ordinance will be prepared with the general fund of expenditures of $37,676,629. With that, and then I will just tell all of the department heads, it'll get out fairly quickly. Tomorrow after our study session, don't plan on anything because we're going to have a meeting, sounds like. Thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned.